So we have a acceptance rate, cases we want of basically just about 10%, which means that we are rejecting 9 of every 10 cases. But guess what? That 10th case is a really, really good case. And, if you are just selecting that 10th case every single time, you can build an enormously profitable law firm. So that's what I've done. And I kind of then apply that to these other areas of law. And, the point is, what I did is not unique. And anyone listening to this podcast can do that. And they should do that. And they should do it now before it becomes harder and more competitive and more expensive.
A couple things about that. I mean, the first thing I'll say is, most lawyers are just working their ass off. They're busy and they're tired and they're not thinking about it. And so part of it is I think you got to have some quiet time to think. That'd be part of it. But the other thing is you got to be looking. You got to open your mind and look. It's the sort of thing, it's almost like your subconscious does some work. You're thinking about it. And then one day you're watching the Lions and you're like, I'm going to do some searches. And then boom, it's there.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. This is a podcast where I get to interview founding attorneys and learn about their journeys and see what kind of cool and interesting things they're up to nowadays. And today my guest is Steve Gursten. I had the pleasure of meeting him, a few weeks ago at a conference. I got to see him speak about a topic that I want to discuss today. It's really interesting. It's about disruption in the law, and so we'll dive into that too. But the other cool thing about Steve is he'll tell you he's got 5 law firms, so that's really interesting as well. So welcome to the show, Steve. Why don't you tell us about yourself, and maybe, you don't have to give us all the law firms yet, but at least tell us, sort of your main law firm.
Sounds good. First, thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Stephen Gursten. I'm an attorney in Michigan. My main law firm, my flagship is called Michigan Auto Law. It's 25 lawyers. We have 2 main locations, one in Metro Detroit and one in West Michigan in Grand Rapids. So, what I say to my friends around the country is I don't want to take over the world. I just want to own my state. So
that's a good way to do it. So 5 law firms, man. When we first met, I remember you were sitting across, we were having a meal. I don't know if it was lunch or breakfast, and you said 5 law firms. My ears immediately went up, and I was like, oh my God, what's he talking about? So tell us, I guess maybe we'll start with sort of what are they and sort of how are they different?
Sure. So, besides Michigan Auto Law, I guess I am fueled by a combination of seeking opportunity and profit and anxiety. So both are great drivers. So about 2013, no, I take that back. It was 2014. I was very fortunate. I actually received the largest truck settlement in America that year. So I was also a little bit flush and had some extra cash. What people forget now, because it seems so like an alternate reality, but in 2014, you have to remember how so many people were saying that autonomous vehicles were coming. They were going to put all the personal injury lawyers out of business. There weren't going to be car accidents anymore. And I was thinking, along the lines of like Nassim Taleb, how can I become anti-fragile? How can I create some ballast? So if auto accidents go away and I become obsolete, and by the way, it would be wonderful if I become obsolete, it would be a better world. But I was thinking, what are areas of law that could be resilient? And, one of those things is people are always going to have jobs, at least for the foreseeable future, before our robot overlords take over, right?
Yeah.
And people are going to get hurt on those jobs. And that attracted me to workers' comp. And in our seminar, I talked a little bit about how I did it, the approaches I took. But long story short, I identified workers' comp as an area of tremendous opportunity. And I bought an existing workers' comp law firm. I don't know very much at all about workers' comp except how it relates to auto accidents, but I did know the search volume for workers' comp lawyers in Michigan was off the charts. And I know the competition, when I looked online at the other law firms that were competing for work comp cases at that time, I thought, you know what, in 6 months, I'm going to own this entire area law. And I created a website. I bought the work comp firm. They were work comp lawyers I already had been dealing with for years and years that I knew and trusted and I knew did a great job. And we've now grown to, I believe, 10 or 11 lawyers just in the work comp law firm. And we are the largest law firm in Michigan as well doing workers' comp. And it's worked out really, really well. So that's workers' comp. I'm sorry. So from there, I had referred a case to an electrocution case, and the attorney had settled it for many, many millions of dollars. And that made me really curious. So my third law firm was a national law firm where I partnered with someone named Jeff Feldman, who I consider to be really the number one. He was clearly the most experienced electrocution lawyer in America. And, to borrow the saying from The Godfather, I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. I told him I would create a website. I'll do all the marketing. I will pay all the case expenses. I'll do all the management. I just need you to vet them. Tell me if you like them. I'm not going to force you to take a case that you don't love. If you love it, work it, and we'll split it 50-50. And that has been phenomenal. We have had many, many really, really big settlements as a result. And it's been a fun adventure handling these cases all over the country. My fourth law firm was an idea I'd been holding on to for about 6-7 years. So Michigan had basically had the worst premises liability law in the country. It was terrible. We had open and obvious as an absolute bar to duty. So it just wiped out premises cases in Michigan. But I always thought I could apply the same rationale to workers' comp to premises. And I had a whole website ready to go. And when the Michigan Supreme Court eventually got to overturning the premises law and brought it back to what most of the country's already like today, I launched it. And today we now have the largest premises liability law firm in the state as well. And then my fifth law firm, which I started 7 months ago, is in California, where I partnered with a absolutely fantastic lawyer, and it's specialized in truck accidents in California. And we are headquartered in Los Angeles, which has the benefit of also being considered a judicial hellhole, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So it's really nice because a $1 million case here in Michigan turns out to be worth about $3 million out in LA. So there's something to love besides just the sunshine out there. And, I have a really great partner out there. And, again, same thing with electrocution, same thing with the other websites where I am really controlling the marketing and management. And I'm not licensed in California, although I've been pro hoc in on a couple of big cases in the past, but he is handling those cases. And it's amazing, as incredibly competitive and expensive as the California personal injury market is, we've already gotten a couple really good cases, and we've only been live for 7 months, which is crazy. So we're off to the races and having fun.
I think that's really cool. So there's a lot to unpack there, and I'm not going to ask you what your sixth law firm is because I know you've already got some idea. I know you're.
I actually, believe it or not, last night and this morning, I really may have started work on my sixth law firm. Believe it or not.
Well, I won't ask you to divulge that because I know you're still an infancy stage here. But so you got the 5 law firms. So the question I asked you across the table was why 5 and not just one? Right. So take me through your thought process.
So I think for a couple of reasons, right? So one, it can work if you're a brand. And that means that you have to be a brand, and that means you have to compete and spend millions and millions of dollars every year to establish yourself as a brand. And I always kind of looked at it differently, which is the money you don't spend on marketing, you keep as profit. And why would I need to establish a brand if I don't need to? So that was the first reason. The second was, listen, there's no question in our world today, there's lots and lots of consumers that are going to drive by a billboard or see a cheesy TV commercial, and they're just going to pick up the phone and call. They're going to get their share, right? There's no question. But there's also no question a very large segment of our population that no matter what area of law it is, they will do their research. These are the people that get on Consumer Reports that, whether it's buying a car or a toaster oven or what have you, they're going to do their research. And if they're going to research a car, they're going to research their lawyer. And if they're looking for an auto accident lawyer or a truck accident lawyer, medical malpractice lawyer, they want to find the best lawyer in that area that they can find. So if you're not a giant brand, then the thought is go deep, not wide, and really own an area of law and establish yourself as the total subject matter expert. What's kind of cool about that is that it doesn't just work for consumers, it also works for Google. So, the analogy I give, and this is a little bit of an oversimplification, but it helps bring the point across, right? So imagine you had a giant pizza and it has 20 different slices on it, and every slice has a different topping. What do you call that pizza? What do you call it?
And everything pizza.
I mean, and you might be an everything lawyer if they look at your website and, click on the practice areas and they see a drop down with 20 different areas of law. The problem is that the consumer gets confused, but the search engines also get confused. And by the way, I want to preface this. I'm not an SEO. I do find it fascinating. Obviously, it's been a huge part of my career, so I read a lot about it. But the reality is, for Google, for the search engines, the same principles apply, right? So if you can have a lot of amazing content that is very thematically relevant, if you could have a link profile that is thematically relevant, if you could establish yourself as the authority and establish, EAT, expertness, authority, and trust in that area, then not only are you going to be probably getting a number of those researcher type consumers, but you're also making it much easier for the search engines to figure out who you are. And what they are trying to do is return the best search results. So if you've got 200 pages of content on one area of law, and you've really established that you are the subject matter expert, and you're competing against 200 other law firms that only have one page on their website for a practice area, you're probably going to rank pretty high, right? And what's fascinating is I've been reading a lot about AI and how AI is going to change search. And everything I just said becomes even more important in our AI future, because what that means now is the search engines like ChatGPT and Gemini, what have you, that use AI, all the large language models, they want to know who you are as an entity. So it's who you are, Jonathan, as an entity, what area of law you specialize in as the entity of Jonathan Hawkins. And for me, for my law firms, it's the same thing. And this is why now, almost going back, things like knowledge graph, and again, establishing yourself as an authority everywhere on the web now becomes so much more important. And it's so much easier to do when you break it up into these niche websites than it is if you try to kind of be greedy and throw it all in on one website. And by the way, like, it doesn't really serve you, does it? I mean, like, I see these law firms and they've got, aviation wrongful death on their website, right? Like, that doesn't help you, I mean, so decide the areas of law you want to be most known for. And to me, again, I feel you're better served by going deep, not wide.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you about the AI, but, for the Google and the AI search for sure, but also sort of the old adage, I think, you market to everyone, you market to no one. I mean,
Exactly.
it's and it helps sort of craft the message to the specific niche target you're after. So I think that's fascinating. I think it's genius, really. And I'm going to get into some of your thought process in a minute, but before we get there, so you've got these 5 different firms.
Can we stop the podcast now, since you called me a genius? We could just end it right now.
Yeah.
And
I'll say it again.
Yeah.
We'll quote that.
All right, good deal.
We'll lead with that everywhere. But, you have the 5 different, how do you keep them straight? How do you manage the 5 That's something that's, and maybe you've got a system, but, I'm thinking multiple payrolls, multiple operations system, all these things. And then, it's hard enough to run one firm, add 2, 3, 4, all of a sudden you're at 5. How do you manage it all?
So this could take an hour, this could take 10 hours, right? But what I would say is it is really helpful to develop a great team that you can rely upon, because you can't do it all yourself. It's great to identify people that can complement the areas that you're weaker in, or just that you don't really like to do. So, for me, the worst thing in the world would be HR. If one secretary is mad at another secretary and it sucks an hour out of my life, that is my definition of hell. I don't want to deal with it, but I'm very fortunate. I have a great COO. I have a great office manager. I have a great CMO. I have some really great vendors that I work with really well, that I develop long-term respectful relationships with. I believe in having a really great management team. I have relied in the past on companies like Vista, which is a consulting service for lawyers. Even though I have a business background, we don't necessarily know what we don't know. And it is really helpful to create the systems that allow these law firms to function. So I am a big systems guy. And then last and most important, I would say, is I've had great partners. So, whether it's my workers' comp law firm, where I already had lawyers that I knew from dealing with them for years, were the lawyers I consider the best work comp lawyers in Michigan already. They were already experts in the field. Same thing with my electrocution. I had a lawyer that I consider the very best in the entire country. It's having really good partners that you can work with. And then I am a big believer in systems. There are books like the Checklist Manifesto. And, the point of all these books is that you could be really, really bright, but when you're getting clobbered by having 300 emails a day and you've got 20 phone calls, you can't keep it all together. You will forget things. And, I really believe, and this is kind of the point of the Checklist Manifesto, this is the point of books like E-Myth Revisited, is the more you can create systems, the easier it becomes to manage these law firms very effectively and also efficiently. And I also believe in art. So trial law is an art. So, the point is you hire great lawyers. The parts that you can systematize as a way of spreading institutional knowledge and doing things at a very high level. But then you let your horses run and perform at the end, because the reality is there's only a certain number of lawyers in this world that have the gift of taking a case that could be worth $1 million and turning that into $5 million. And my value proposition to my lawyers is really simple. I will pay you better than any law firm in Michigan. I've got crazy deals, but I also have almost no turnover. People don't leave. And that's because I create a law firm where the grass cannot be greener. Now, the trade-off is they have to be excellent. And if they are excellent, they will produce more money here and make more money than they ever could anywhere else. But that also helps me. And, the reality is, if you're not penny wise and pound foolish, which is, I think, a real problem with a lot of law firm owners, they underpay, they try to pay as little as they can. If you pay for excellence, but you demand excellence, you will make more money in the long run. You will keep institutional knowledge and have a better culture. And frankly, it just feels good, to be that kind of owner.
Man, you just hit all the big points. If this is not one of your talks, it should be. And if it's not a book, you need to write it. But it's leadership team, systems, hire really good people, take care of them so they never leave. That's basically it, right? Well, the other thing we haven't talked about is you still try a lot of cases too, right? You are not one of these CEO lawyers that doesn't do anything. You're out there trying, like, real trials. Multi-week trials, right?
Yeah, in fact, I just finished a double death truck accident case in October. I still try cases, and I still love being a trial lawyer. I still love the practice of law. I've tried cases now in 14 states where I've been brought in by other lawyers, who've heard me speak on trucking or traumatic brain injury and asked me to co-counsel with them. I still love the law, but I also love the business of law. And for me, it's fun. And it's also trying to create a world that's more sustainable. So, the whole weight of running a law firm isn't just on my shoulders, and I can have hopefully a more sustainable career.
So you mentioned Vista, and we met at a Vista conference, and you gave this talk. It was something about the radical disruption coming to law, or maybe that's already here. And I thought it was fantastic. You start out, it's one of those scare the shit out of everybody at the beginning.
Yeah.
Our life as we know it's about to end. But then, so maybe let's start with the premise and sort of what you see here or what's coming, and then we can talk about sort of the solutions or maybe the ways to address it afterwards. So lay it out. What do you see happening to the practice of law from your perspective?
There are a couple big things that are coming, a couple big inflection points. The first to me is the introduction of safety technology that is going to dramatically reduce the number of auto accidents on our roads over the next 5 to 10 years. It's already here today, but it is now going to be mandatory. And every vehicle sold in America by 2029 must have automatic emergency braking. The Insurance Institute of Highway Safety estimates that's going to reduce the number of car crashes by about 50%. Now, remember, my law firm is called Michigan Auto Law. This is what I do. I actually think it could be more than 50% because I look at my own cases. I mean, I would say maybe 80% are rear enders at red lights, people that are stopped on the freeway, they get smashed from behind, people that get rear-ended by someone who's texting and driving. And what automatic emergency braking will do is it literally will stop the vehicle from smashing into the car in front of them. I believe the mandatory requirement is something along the lines of 9 miles an hour to something like 90 miles an hour. So it's a very broad spectrum. And the rule took effect this year. So, so it is coming. And I think one of my messages, because there's a lot of personal injury law firms at the Vista conference, is you need to prepare for this. And how are you going to adapt to a world where, there's only so many car crashes that take place in any given month? And then if you start to reduce that, what effect is that going to have on your practice? And my real message is, what steps can you take now that can help make you more resilient and anti-fragile to that enormous change, right? So, and I gave a couple different examples at the Vista conference. The second thing that's coming, which is fascinating, but is another huge inflection point, is the advent of ABS, alternative business structures, and non-lawyer ownership of law firms, and the astounding amount of hedge fund and private equity money that is already pouring into personal injury. And it is, and how will you be able to compete with just the millions and millions of dollars that will be pouring into case acquisition? But it's not just the dollars, it's also the sophistication. It is, listen, as you know probably better than anybody with what you do and what you see, lawyers are massively inefficient. We're really bad businessmen or women. There's very few economies of scale. We are paying over the market for pretty much everything, from stapled orders to TV commercials and everything in between. We overpay our staff. Like a private equity company would probably love me because, I am very profitable and I overpay, and they would look at my law firm and say, we can slash overhead costs and just, reap profits. But that is how they're going to look at these law firms. Very similar to how they looked at dental offices, in the 1990s, and, these small doctors' offices in the early aughts, where, again, private equity swept in and bought out a lot of these, 1-2 person doctors, doctor offices. But the same concept applies. Lawyers are really bad businessmen. or women. We don't know how to do math very well. And when you combine these MBAs and this torrent of money and things like AI and the sophistication they are going to have with just everything, it is going to make the world incredibly difficult. And it's already getting very difficult, but even harder for your solo, your small office, the general practitioner to be able to compete. So, I almost look at it like there's been 3 periods where everything has changed, right? So you had the practice of law before 1977, which was, small firm versus small firm. Workers' comp firms would pay off the unions, what have you. There'd be, but basically it was a more level playing field for the most part. Then you had Bates versus State Bar of Arizona in 1977 and the advent of TV advertising. And that brought us up until basically, let's say 2024, where you have normally in every big market in America, you now have a couple 800-pound gorillas that are the biggest spenders. You have Morgan & Morgan and those firms that are coming in and spending huge, vast amounts of money. And now in 2025, we have this third inflection point with the advent of, what will our world look like when you have hedge funds and private equity investing in law? And it's a fascinating thing to speculate about, and I talked a little bit about all the amazing conflicts of interest and how these things are going to be sorted out or not sorted out, over the next few years. But but I also, if you recall during the seminar, I just showed a whole bunch of different headlines from a whole bunch of different articles that basically says, you small office lawyer about to get wiped out. And it is going to get super competitive and even more expensive and even more difficult to acquire cases. So those are some very interesting headwinds that we are facing.
It's interesting. I don't know. Personally, I don't know if this has happened yet, but I envision the situation. I can't remember if you mentioned it or not, but where you've got these gigantic insurance companies that have pools of money and they need to invest it somewhere. They usually buy big real estate and all these things, but I could see the insurance company basically being on both sides of the V and no one would really know it. So it's like they're basically paying themselves in the circle, right? So they own the plaintiff, they own the fund that owns the plaintiff's firm, but then they're also the one, paying the whatever out. So they're never going to lose, right?
Well, and think about the amazing conflict here, right? So let's say State Farm, you can't watch a football game without seeing 20 State Farm commercials. It drives me nuts, but imagine your next football game is going to be, you can save 20% on your insurance if you enroll in State Farm Legal. And meanwhile, State Farm uses Xactimate, which is their claims software that they use to process personal injury claims for their claims adjusters. The whole point of Xactimate and Colossus, which is used by about 80 different insurance companies in the industry today, is meant to gradually suppress the settlement value of cases by tracking very carefully median average settlements in that geographic region and then slowly ratcheting them down. How does State Farm also offer to represent you if you've been injured in a claim when they also have an entire business, that's based on paying as little as possible on those claims? So it is fascinating. Google right now has an ownership interest in Rocket Lawyer. What happens when Google gets into legal and says, and starts altering the search results in Search or in Gemini and pushing towards Rocket Lawyer and suppressing other results? The potential for conflicts of interest are massive, just massive. They're all over the place.
Yeah. Real quick, thanks for listening. If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It would really mean a lot to me. Now back to the show. So there's the other thing that everybody's talking about nowadays that could be seen as a threat or maybe a bright light, at least in some of the functions that a plaintiff's lawyer does, and that's AI. I can tell you I was at a conference the last couple of days, and it was really hourly type lawyers. And AI is just going to wipe out, the folks that bill by the hour that huge tranches of that practice are just going to go away with AI. Now, on the flip side, for a PI lawyer, I mean, there's huge pieces of what you do that perhaps it might help you be more efficient. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on the AI part?
Yeah, so if you remember, I talked about AI a little bit as well. So AI is going to slash overhead and costs in things like demand packages and medical records and medical chronologies and helping us prepare for depositions. The advantages are amazing. You're right. If you are a lawyer that is doing, let's say, contracts, wills, trusts, divorce, basic anything that can be done algorithmically or a large language model with I do think you're going to get wiped out. And the irony about personal injury is, even though most lawyers haven't been in a courtroom in 20 years, but that's also, I think, our saving grace, right? Because AI can't try a case, they can't appear in court. There's some several 100,000 English-speaking lawyers from India and now from places like Colombia and other areas. They are not licensed in Michigan or Georgia to appear in court. So I think almost going back to our roots, trying cases, appearing in court, being a litigator, that is still going to be overall pretty resistant to the huge changes that we're going to see with AI. But as a law firm owner, listen, it's a better world today. And I mean this sincerely as, I have a daughter. The world's changed. 2 generations ago, really talented women tended to go into things like teaching, nursing. They became paralegals and legal secretaries. Now they go to law school. And, the reality is it's really, really hard to find a great paralegal these days. And honestly, a great legal secretary is like worth their weight in gold. You just can't find them anymore. And AI is really going to help us with a lot of the things that, for example, paralegals used to do, that AI can now do much more efficiently and at a fraction of the cost.
Yeah, it is. The future is going to be a lot different. So, the second part of your talk, you sort of gave sort of a framework or sort of advice on how to at least think differently. I mean, didn't give specific stuff, but this maybe circles back to when you started looking at your workers' comp firm. It's thinking outside the box. What can we do? How do we diversify our, revenue streams or verticals, whatever? So what's your advice as you see the landscape? How should a lawyer out there be thinking? How do I adjust my strategy, whatever, to sort of adapt in this new world?
Yeah. So, the saying, the Chinese fortune cookie proverb, something like, the best time to plant a tree is yesterday. The second best time to plant a tree is today. And the point of my talk was, if these disruptive changes are coming, you're much better served doing it now, today, than trying to do it 5 years from now when everybody else is scrambling as well. So I talked about how I identify opportunity, because the key is it's not unique to me. You were very gracious earlier when you said it was genius, but the reality is it's just looking for opportunity and being able to handle risk, which, by the way, is something lawyers are notoriously bad at doing.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, that's why we became lawyers to begin with. But there's so many massive opportunities out there. So I might be the only personal injury lawyer in America that was an econ major in college. But what makes a good business? And it's 2 things. It's number one, it's meeting an existing demand. And the higher that demand, chances are the more money you're going to make. And the second thing is scarcity. And the mistake that I believe most lawyers make is we allow ourselves to become commodities. We are replaceable. We are indistinguishable from several hundred or several thousand other lawyers that are competing for the same cases and essentially saying the same thing, right? So the idea is, if it's too late and you're already in one of those areas, the challenge is, how can you stand out? How can you make yourself remarkable? How can you make yourself different from everybody else so you are still the go-to lawyer in that area? And I have many thoughts on that. But to your question, the second thing where there's tremendous opportunity still today is there are so many areas of law that have amazing opportunity, very high demand, and scarcity. So the example that I gave in our seminar was my workers' comp law firm. And, I knew back in 2014 that I wanted to diversify, but I didn't really know where or how. And I talked about how I did it. So I was watching a football game one Sunday afternoon, and I'm watching the Lions lose because in 2014, the Lions were doing a lot of losing. And I started, just putting in different areas of law into Moz, which was the tool I was using at the time. And I just wanted to see what was the volume of, for people who were using those keywords, how high was the search volume for different areas of law? And with workers' comp, even though there were a ton of work comp law firms out there, there weren't very many very good websites. And the reality is, comp has been fallen on hard times in most states for a very long time. Most of the lawyers who do comp are kind of old. They don't really understand digital marketing. They have really ugly websites. They have no backlink profiles. They have really crappy content. And I remember looking at the search volume and then looking at the competition when it came up. And I literally said to myself, I will own this area of law in 6 months. And it turned out I ended up owning it in 3 months, and we've never, we've always been number one in Google since. And, even though comp is terrible as a general rule, the reality is there's still some amazing good cases out there. So we have a acceptance rate, cases we want of basically just about 10%, which means that we are rejecting 9 of every 10 cases. But guess what? That 10th case is a really, really good case. And, if you are just selecting that 10th case every single time, you can build an enormously profitable law firm. So that's what I've done. And I kind of then apply that to these other areas of law. And, the point is, what I did is not unique. And anyone listening to this podcast can do that. And they should do that. And they should do it now before it becomes harder and more competitive and more expensive.
A couple things about that. I mean, the first thing I'll say is, most lawyers are just working their ass off. They're busy and they're tired and they're not thinking about it. And so part of it is I think you got to have some quiet time to think. That'd be part of it. But the other thing is you got to be looking. You got to open your mind and look. It's the sort of thing, it's almost like your subconscious does some work. You're thinking about it. And then one day you're watching the Lions and you're like, I'm going to do some searches. And then boom, it's there. And then you're like, all right, I got it. And, most lawyers, at least that I talk to, they're just sort of caught in the cycle. They're on the treadmill. They're not stepping back, looking at the scene and looking at, the potential train wreck that's ahead. And they're like, wait a second, how to get off this train? And so, I thought that was really, your brain works that way. And you've done it now a couple times, and it's probably you can't stop. I mean, you just mentioned your 6th one's on the way.
6th one might literally be on the way as of this morning, which is crazy. But it's but what I've tried to do, so my first 15 years, I wanted to be the best trial lawyer in Michigan. And my goal was to have a great career where people referred me cases. And, what I realized as I got closer into that world, and don't get me wrong, I still love it. I still try cases, but there's a reason why there aren't very many older, fantastic trial lawyers. And the reason is it does take its pound of flesh. It is hard. There's normally a personal cost. If you really get to know these lawyers, and many of them are my friends, but a lot of them are divorced. A lot of them have had multiple marriages. A lot of them have estranged relationships with their kids. A lot of them pay a personal price in terms of their health. And, there's a lot of stress. And what I realized was I wanted to create a future that was not dependent on others, where I had control of my own destiny, and where it could be sustainable and I can take a lot of the pressure off myself and try the cases I want to try, not that I have to try every hot grounder that gets referred to me by another lawyer. And it was just very important to me also just, to have a great marriage, to have a great relationship with my kids when they were young. And that became very important to me as well. And starting these other law firms, it sounds risky when you first hear about it, but it's actually, there's far less risk doing it my way than doing it the way everybody else does it. And I feel like it's given me a lot of freedom as well to be able to pursue, whether it's family, interests, hobbies, because all the weight of the world isn't just on my shoulders anymore. I've mastered the thing that most lawyers can't, which is I now have multiple revenue streams, and I have checks coming in every day that I can open while I'm sitting there by a pool one day. It's kind of the dream. You don't always have to keep working harder and harder and more hours to create and generate these multiple revenue streams. It takes a lot of pressure off you.
Yeah, and you're, as you say, anti-fragile. And it's got me thinking. I'll tell you, I've got some ideas, but we'll talk about that later. But so I want to shift gears a little bit. So you sort of mentioned this, but we met. You were speaking at this conference, and I went on your website, and you speak all the time, all over the place. Which I wanted to sort of dive into. Some lawyers, rely on referrals, and sort of how do we get referrals? How do we get? You can go to lunch, you can take them to dinner, all these sorts of things, but speaking is a pretty powerful way to do it as well. And I want to sort of get your take on it. So the first thing is, early in your career, was this something that you just said, all right, this is my strategy, I'm going to go speak everywhere, or did it just sort of happen on accident?
Well, both. You have to put yourself out there, right? And you can't say no when you're invited. So remember, early in my career, my world was very different. My law firm was 4 lawyers. Now it's 25. So, but most of my cases, almost all my cases at that time came from other lawyers as referrals. So I was very driven to put myself out there for referrals. And I was very fortunate because I became a lawyer in 1995. And 1995, for the listeners who do personal injury, was when Allstate came out with its MIST, Minimal Impact Soft Tissue program. And for the first time in an entire generation, they were making lawyers go to trial on low vehicle damage soft tissue cases. So I'm a baby lawyer in 1995, and all of a sudden there are all these cases to try and all these opportunities to get great trial experience, and an entire generation of lawyers that, Warren Buffett has a saying, which is when the tide goes out, you can see who's swimming naked. And everybody was swimming naked because no one had no one had a jury trial in like 20 years. So I was trying cases left and right. And my theory, even back then, was my greatest fear was being lumped into an indistinguishable mass of other lawyers. How can I make myself stand out? How can I be different? How can I be remarkable? And trial was the easiest, fastest way to do that, because there's not many lawyers that go to trial. So I started trying cases left and right. And I was very fortunate. Very, very early on, I started getting $1 million verdicts, and that led to more referrals. And, my philosophy at that time was I had no ego. Like if I lose, probably a case I should have lost, right? But if I win, I'm a hero. And it leads to more referrals. And I think in my second year, I got that $1 million verdict on a soft tissue case with Allstate on a $10,000 offer. And then the following year, I received in Oakland County, Michigan, which is a very conservative Republican, think Mitt Romney type county, a $4.5 million verdict on a mild TBI where the person had worked for 8 months after the crash. And guess what happened? Even though there were lots of lawyers, people were coming out of the woodwork to refer me these cases. And then, a year or two after that, I got my first multi-million-dollar trucking verdict. And all of a sudden I became the trucking lawyer. I realized at that point that being a trucking lawyer is a lot more profitable than being a soft tissue lawyer. So I really did a deep dive on trucking. And I was one of the original lawyers that really started specializing in trucking, speaking all over the country on trucking, traumatic brain injury as well, trial as well. And that really led to me being one of a very small handful of lawyers in Michigan that became the go-to referral source for lawyers that had a hot grounder where they couldn't settle it and they needed to try the case. And the more national speaking I did, the more I kind of became the Michigan guy. And where I think our world has really changed is now we have listservs. And I'll give you a great example. So today is May 8th. And for any listeners of yours that go back and look on the Maryland trial lawyer listserv last night on May 7th, a lawyer puts on there, I have a big auto accident case in Detroit, Michigan. Can someone recommend a lawyer? And I had 3 lawyers out there that all put my name out there, which now means not only did that lawyer see my name and he referred me the case this morning, but several thousand other Maryland lawyers also saw my name. And you become the Michigan guy. And that is a hell of a lot more effective than taking someone to lunch or meeting them at Starbucks, right?
Yeah.
So if you can become the Georgia guy, the Michigan guy, and I spend, I will always accept a phone call from an out-of-state lawyer. And even if I can't help them, even if they're calling me and asking for a divorce lawyer or something like that, I will spend the time to help them because I want to be known as the go-to lawyer in Michigan. And that is also warped my practice. I mean, I will tell you, I have 25 lawyers. I could let everybody go tomorrow in Michigan Auto Law, my main law firm. If I just hung a shingle, I get 2 to 3 phone calls a week from some lawyer somewhere in the United States that has heard me speak or gotten my name from someone, and I would never have to worry about anything, and I would have a great life. And that is what speaking can do for you. So, and it's a hell of a lot better, I feel like, than putting my ugly mug on a billboard or, a bus wrap.
A lot cheaper.
A lot cheaper.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm with you 100%. I think, I started early in my career. It was going to lunches and coffees and dinners, but there's only so much time in the day. You only have 3 meals. I mean, you got to do some work too. It's hard to scale that. I enjoy it still. I mean, I enjoy the human contact, but when you speak, there's the scalability aspect, but then also, I guess, sort of the expertise aspect. And then if you actually can speak well, then there's sort of the demonstration aspect. I don't know let me hear your thoughts. So you get invited to speak, not you, but a person gets invited to speak, and then, they don't prepare and they're just reading from notes, and it's, just a terrible presentation. That might be, I don't know, you tell me, is it worse than not speaking at all, or at least you got enough there?
You become very forgettable very quickly. You also, I think, earn a little bit of people's ire and anger, right? Because they spend a lot of money to go somewhere and hear you speak, and, you're not taking it seriously. So, my tips for what it's worth is someone that's given 400 or 500 seminar talks over the years is take it very seriously, be very substantive, give away a lot of valuable information, but also be entertaining. So, try not to speak from notes. Try not to read your PowerPoint slides. Try to maintain really good eye contact with the audience. And the reality is, just like everything, the more you do it, the easier it gets. And the more entertaining and the more substantive you are, the more it does then lead to more invitations to speak. And, so for example, the state trial lawyer directors, the executive directors of all 50 states, they have their own listserv. And they are always looking for really highly rated speakers that they can invite to speak at their state's trial lawyer seminars. And if you get on that list where people are putting you out there, the invitations are just going to keep coming in and coming in. And people that hear you speak in the audience are going to keep inviting you to speak at other conferences as well. So everything builds on itself, but you have to deliver, and you have to treat it like you should, that this is a mark of respect, and you should take it really seriously.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm borrowing the term from somebody else, but edutainment, you definitely want to educate, but you got to entertain. At least keep them, somewhat, you don't have to tell jokes, but, at least keep them engaged. But yeah, so I've taken some notes here. That's really good, but I'm with you as well. You can almost treat it like it's, you're not going to go in front of it. You shouldn't, at least go do a closing argument in front of the jury, not prepared for that. It's not going to end well. I mean, maybe you get lucky, but yeah. So we've been going at it for a while. We haven't even talked about, sort of how you got started and all that. So maybe we'll have to come on again for that. But another thing you've done, and this is maybe speaking as part of this, but you're involved with a lot of national groups. So, you primarily practice in Michigan, but again, you're very involved in some of these national lawyer groups and other groups like that. So what's your thought process behind that? Maybe advice to other lawyers, get out of your local jurisdiction and maybe go national versus just staying local.
Yeah, so that is exactly my advice. So I realized, fortunately, very, very young, very early in my career, that when I speak in Michigan, being from Michigan, everybody calls me, but they're not referring me their cases for the most part. They just want free help. They just want my work product. They want my trucking rods. They want to know if I can give them a copy of my closing argument that I got on, my last big verdict, what have you. Everyone's kind of mooching. And, listen, I'm all for helping your brothers and sisters in, your local bar, but it's not making your life that much better. If you go national, like I said, then you become the Michigan guy, or that, in your case, the Georgia guy. And, there's a lot of great lawyers out there, a lot of extremely successful lawyers out there. They don't want to try a case in Michigan. They want to refer you the case and get the referral fee. So, I looked at it and I said, if I do the Michigan thing, it is a thankless job for a whole bunch of reasons. And if I go national, first, it's more intellectually interesting. You meet a lot of different lawyers. You get I think as a general rule, they're at a little bit of a higher level, I think, than a lot of the people from your state that speak at these seminars. You learn more interesting ways and more cutting edge ways that things are being done. And you create these amazing relationships where, like I said last night, when someone's looking for a lawyer in Michigan on the Maryland listserv, you've got multiple people that are putting your name out there. So, and it goes also fundamentally to what we were talking about earlier, which is decide what you want to be, and don't be a jack of all trades, but decide what area of law you want to be and develop mastery. So, I'm very fortunate. I've been the past president now of the trucking lawyers, the traumatic brain injury lawyers, the distracted driving litigation group. I've been the president of the Belli Society and, a few others, but that has created a network of trusted friends and great lawyers. And it has also made me a much better lawyer as well. And, by the way, it's funny, but I have lawyers in Michigan all the time calling me saying, I've got a lawyer, I need a lawyer in such and such city and state. Who do you recommend? Because you also develop a network of really great trusted friends all over the country. And, I literally know everybody everywhere. As a general rule, like, on the speaker circuit, because you become friends with them over time. And it's just a very, very rewarding way to also build your practice.
Great point. It definitely benefits you building the practice, all that, but it's the friendships and the relationships. That's really what being human's all about. And the more you got, the better. So, okay, last question. This may be a little complicated, but I like to ask, as you look forward for the next 5, 10, 15 years, what's the vision for your firm? But you've got multiple firms. So, you decide how you want to answer it. So, what does the future look like for you?
This will be my worst answer of the day, I think. I really don't like when people have written in stone, 5, 10-year plans, because too many things can change. Let's go back to, 2014. I thought by 2019, I'd be out of business. I'd be obsolete as a car accident lawyer. Even General Motors was saying that they were going to manufacture cars by the year 2019 that didn't have steering wheels and brakes.
Wow.
So think about that, there were people like, Sergey Brin and Elon Musk that were guaranteeing you that everything would be level 5 fully autonomous, so who knows what our future is really going to be. To me, it is so much more important to be agile, to be able to look for opportunity, and also to work on yourself, right? To have the emotional stability, to be able to handle things like risk and uncertainty, which most people can't do. And that requires a lot of work. But those are the things that I think you need to do, which is always be looking for opportunity, looking for things that excite you, that get your juices going, whether it's a great case or a great challenge or a new business opportunity. But don't write it in stone because, 3 years ago, nobody was talking about AI. And look at our world today. So things are moving too quickly.
Well, Steve, this has been awesome. You dropped some really good nuggets. I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to learning what the sixth law firm is going to be. So make sure you tell me once it's up and running, let me know. But for anybody out there that wants to get in touch with you, maybe they've got a big trucking case they want to bring you in on, or maybe they got a big Michigan case, what's the best way to find you?
Best way is through my website, which is michiganautolaw.com, michiganautolaw.com. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, this has been fun. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.